Who are the bad girls or vamps of the 1920s romance movies? Where did they come from, and were they really all that bad? Were men their only victims, or did women also fall under their spell? And how did they influence the leading lady roles of the 30s, 40s, and beyond? That's what we explore in our third episode on the Roaring Twenties in our series, 100 Years of Romance, a decade-by-decade look at sex, love, and romance on the silver screen. Hi, welcome to Cinema Rolls, your go-to channel for movie comparisons. I'm your host, Basha, and we've got a lot of steamy scenes to get through, so we're going to dive right in. Our spotlight in this episode is going to shine on the vamps from the silent film romances of the Roaring Twenties. In this video, we're going to look at who and what they were, how they lured their victims, the hold they had over men, and how they manipulate men to get what they want. And then, in parts 2 and 3, we'll check out their devastating impact on the lives of others, their backstories, whether or not they evolve or show any personal growth over time, and how their stories end. Now, just in case you're not familiar with vamps, let's talk about who they were.
She was a scamp, a camp, and a bit of a tramp. She was a V-A-M-P, vamp.
The word vamp was used to describe a seductive woman about 100 years ago. They were typically exotic, sexually dominant and aggressive, and beautiful, but cold and calculating. In other words, they were female predators. The term was actually popularized with the 1915 film A Fool There Was, starring Theda Bara, whose character was known only as the vampire. Don't let that innocent face fool you. Unfortunately, most of Theda Bara's films were destroyed in a fire in the 20th Century Fox vault in 1937, but there were plenty of other actresses who picked up where she left off, building their careers on vamp roles in the 20s and adding their own signature to the mix. Some of the more notable vamps include Nita Naldi, Louise Glaum, Pola Negri, Louise Brooks, Greta Garbo, and later Marlene Dietrich. Of course, the vamps were not literally vampires of the blood-sucking variety. Instead, they sucked the life force out of their victims. You may know some people like that today. And where the flappers, which we looked at in our last video, were masters at flirtation and fun, the vamps were consummate seductresses. But unlike the flappers, who, in spite of their fun-loving, independent, thumb-your-nose-at-authority image, still had marriage as their ultimate goal, the goals of the vamps were sex, wealth, and maybe a little help disposing of an inconvenient problem or two. More on that later, but first let's get a feel for their personalities. First of all, they could be a bit narcissistic. In this scene from Flesh and the Devil, Felicitas is getting dressed for her husband's funeral, but she seems more interested in which hat to wear. And although they're more like vultures than crows, they do share the crow's fascination with shiny objects.
How much money you got, big boy?
In some movies, the vamps are portrayed as purposely malicious and even demonic. You can see this in the opening credits and some of the intertitles in the 1920 movie Sex, starring Louise Glaum. The movie was later renamed Spider-Woman, and Glaum's venomous character is even further emphasized by the spider costume she wears in her cabaret dance number. In Flesh and the Devil, the prayers of young Herta seem to be physically tormenting Felicitas, similar to what you'd expect if you showed a crucifix to a vampire. So now that we've gotten a feel for who they are, let's explore how our vampires lure their victims into their webs of intrigue. Their first and most basic weapon of choice is the eyes. Once she's got a man's attention with her eyes, she's going to want to draw him closer, and a cigarette makes the perfect bait. And now that she's got him within reach, she's not shy about initiating physical contact. Of course, the dance floor provides the perfect opportunity for getting close. Or flaunting what she's got. And if they really needed to garner a man's sympathies, there's a little trick that women of that era had that we haven't seen in the movies or in real life for many decades. They simply faint or lose consciousness. To all you women out there watching, if you're having a hard time getting your man to do something for you, maybe you could take some lessons from the vamps of yesteryear. Just feign a faint and who knows what it'll do for you. But seriously, don't try this at home. The vamps were highly skilled fainters and they never seemed to get hurt in the fall. But the favors this little trick got for them led to the downfall of many a man. We'll dive into the details of some of these stories later on, but now that we know how they rope them in, let's take a look at the mysterious hold that the vamps seem to have on men once they've gotten them under their spell. Their power over men was almost supernatural, which might go a long way toward explaining the popularity of the vamp in an age when there was a rising tide of interest in spiritualism, seances, and everything otherworldly. Their men seem to be in an almost hypnotic state when they're with them, a state in which they can and often are talked into doing just about anything, including murder. In the 1921 movie Sappho, men are so obsessed with Sappho that it incites them to violence, but her mere presence seems to render them helpless and ineffectual. And in the 1929 early talkie musical Hallelujah, the preacher Zeke falls under the spell of Chick, played by Nina Mae McKinney, for the second time after he baptizes her. Now he's a real goner, and coaxing him down from the pulpit is child's play for her. And once he's down, he's practically a zombie. The vamp's hold over men is so pervasive that they seem to be willing to abandon anyone and anything, including their friends, family, and even their own principles, to be with her. Chick whips herself up into a religious frenzy while keeping her eyes locked on Zeke and daring him to follow her, which he does on the very day that he got engaged to his childhood sweetheart, Rose. In the 1927 film Sunrise, all the woman from the city has to do is whistle, and her married lover comes running. And in Flesh and the Devil, Leo has promised the first dance at the ball to his childhood friend Herta, but when he spots Felicitas from across the room, he just walks away from Herta, leaving her in the lurch. Years later, when Felicitas is married to his best friend, she still has that magnetic hold over Leo and convinces him to run away with her. He refuses at first, but it only takes a few minutes of friendly persuasion for him to change his mind. In Pandora's Box, Alva is so smitten with Lulu that he asks her to go away with him, just moments after she's married his father. And in The Woman Men Yearn For, Stasha and Henry have just met on the train, but all it takes from her is some hypnotic eye contact, half a feint, and a tale of woe for him to jump off the train and follow, leaving his bride behind on their wedding night. And a vamp is nothing if not a master of manipulation. She'll use sex, lies, and everything in her arsenal to get what she wants. In the 1926 film The Temptress, starring Greta Garbo, Elena meets Robledo, played by Antonio Morena, at a masquerade. They immediately fall in love, and she refuses to tell him her name, but when asked, she declares that she's free to love him. Later, when he finds out that she's actually married to a good friend of his, she tells him, "If I lied, it was because I love you." In fact, that seems to be the vamp's excuse for just about everything. I did it because I love you, usually after having just met the guy once or twice. We see the same story played out at the ball in Flesh and the Devil when Leo asks Felicitas, "Who are you?" And she answers, "What does it matter?" It's not until he's already heavily, and I mean heavily involved, that he discovers she's married. And when he returns from military service 5 years later, only to find the widowed Felicitas now married to his best friend Ulrich, She convinces Leo not to stay away from their home because Ulrich needs him. But this is only a ploy to get close to him again. In Hallelujah, Chick gets Zeke all hot and bothered and then convinces him to blow the $100 that he and his whole community made in the cotton fields by taking a chance on doubling it in a game of craps. Of course, it's a setup, and she encourages him to keep playing after his first loss until he's lost everything. And when a vamp feels threatened, she knows exactly how to defuse the situation. When Sappho wants to leave her pimp and run away with Richard, the pimp threatens to tell Richard that it was she who drove his brother mad. That's the last thing she wants, so she pretends she was just joking, saying, "How could I ever leave you?" And he seems mollified for the moment because he wants to believe her. And in The Woman Men Yearn For, Sasha's captor suspects that she's planning her escape, but she assuages his suspicions with a little kiss, after first getting his sympathy by fainting. In the 1929 film Asphalt, Betty, played by Elsa Kramer, takes manipulation to a whole new level. First, she flirts with a jeweler to distract him while she's sticking a diamond to the pointy end of her umbrella. Then, when she's arrested, she tries to garner the young constable's sympathy with a sob story and convinces him to take her to her flat to get her documents. But he's not particularly sympathetic, so she keeps up the crying act while keeping an eye on the cop to see if it's working. When she doesn't come out of her bedroom for a while, he opens the door to find her in bed. And when he wakes her up, she tells him she doesn't feel well and rolls over and goes back to sleep. And now we're going to see how our vamps pull out all the stops when their tricks aren't working. So the cop tells Betty that he'll call an ambulance if she's sick, and she does some quick thinking and acting. Look how she's dressed. This girl has got some balls. This story does take some interesting twists, so stay with us to find out how it ends. In Sunrise, when the woman from the city tries to talk her lover into selling his farm and moving to the city with him, and maybe drowning his wife to get her out of the way, he's initially outraged, as any reasonable person would be. But all it takes is a little spooning and the temptation of life under the city lights to get him to come round. In The Temptress, Elena begs Robledo not to leave her behind in Paris. When her plea falls on deaf ears, she lays it on thick, but he leaves her behind anyway. She later follows him to Argentina along with her husband and tries to convince Robledo to come back to Paris with her. But this is one vamp who's met her match. He's immune to her feminine wiles now that he understands who and what she is. Or is he? We'll come back to them later. In Pandora's Box, Dr. Shun tries to break it off with his kept woman Lulu because he wants to marry, and, as he says, one doesn't marry such women as Lulu, but he can't resist her for long. And in Sumaroon, Yanaya throws herself at the handsome cloth merchant as a matter of course, not knowing that he's already in love with another woman. When her come-on doesn't get the result she wants, she goes after him like a bull in a china shop. Well, that didn't work out very well for her. She seems utterly devastated. But what's truly devastating is the impact that the vamps have on the lives of others and what happens to the vamps themselves in the long run. That's what we're going to check out in parts 2 and 3. I hope you've been enjoying this little jaunt through the world of the Roaring Twenties romances as much as I have. If so, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification button to make sure you don't miss a single episode. See you next time. Until then, try some more cinema rolls. They're good for you.